Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Precursive Perspective with me, Jonathan Corrie. I look like I'm, being interviewed for my crimes here today because, spoiler alert, I'm in our new office in London, which is very nice. I'm in a super hot, cool booth room, which is also not so nice. And I'm delighted to be joined today by a business which is also super hot in the marketplace, which is MongoDB. And I'd love to welcome Brad Jacobs, who's the VP of Worldwide Professional Services. How are you, sir?
I'm doing great today. Thanks, Jonathan.
Good. You're also in London. Where's home for you? I
am in London. I live in southwest London by Clapham Junction area, Clapham Common.
Yeah. Okay. Very good. I am an East Dulwich man, so
okay.
I'm also south of the river. Well, listen, I really appreciate you taking the time to join us today. Just to begin with, it'd be great if you could give us a little bit about kind of the scope of your role and any kind of career or industry highlights leading up to this as well, if you don't mind.
Yeah, not a problem. So here at MongoDB, I joined when the company was much smaller. In the same role that I'm in today. The PS organization was 35 people. The entire company was 750 people, and it is purely professional services, which at the time when it was 35 people, as you can imagine, was fairly unsophisticated. And it was bootstrapped, just doing what we could. Since then, almost 5 years ago now, we're sort of 200 people plus, and in services, and the larger organization is approaching 4,000. And so it is still strictly services, which is to say that I don't have under my responsibility anything like support or customer success, but we work very closely with all of these other functions, and we try to operate as a broader unit. Nonetheless, from a services perspective, we're responsible for helping to sell services, getting customers delivered and successful, and ultimately at more or less paying for ourselves to continue to grow and invest in services so that our customers get more benefit.
Awesome. And tell us a little bit about like the solution if folks don't know MongoDB, which a lot of people will know MongoDB. But tell us a little bit about what you guys provide in terms of value in your solution for your customers.
Sure. So it is MongoDB began as a document-based database, which has evolved toward into more of a SaaS data platform in our Atlas platform, where we have a variety of data-oriented solutions. We're not trying to, or let's say products, we're not trying to be a solution provider or an application provider. We want to provide all of the ingredients for developers to build modern applications. And the fact that it's a document-based database, I don't want to not to stress, it's the novel way, more or less, for developers to build applications relative to how they once were built and still are built on top of relational databases like Oracle and DB2, et cetera. The document base means that you don't need to predefine all of your schema ahead of time and figure out how your data is going to work and normalize all of that. But it also means, certainly the way that we've implemented it, that it's very integrated into the developer experience. And so that you interact as a developer with the database as if you were writing code, because you're just writing code, very unlike other relational databases where you interact through calling SQL scripts that then call the database, and there's an extra level of abstraction and sometimes even some mad science trying to figure out what those queries look like. A thing that I've at least been familiar with in the past and struggled with. But here it's, there are still challenges, and there's still interesting different ways for developers to do things right or do things wrongly, but it's a much more seamless experience, and developers tend to like that more.
Right. Okay, cool. And I thought what was interesting about your background, because I do deliberately sort of, pick people in the marketplace that I want to talk to. And I noticed Bizarre Voice, which probably is, the Irish legend, the Irish wizard, Pat Phelan, right? In the market. Yeah. So I'd imagine with that experience, Bizarre Voice, and then Fuse and MongoDB, you've seen a few different iterations or nuances, I would imagine, to like post-sale delivery, right? I would guess in your career coming up.
Yes, I've been fortunate and a little bit deliberate to choose solutions that were completely different because it's a different challenge.
Yep.
Because frankly, I'm less concerned with the technology myself, and I'm more concerned with the business ownership, the business management, the scale and transformation, etc. So I've done a variety of different things, and in fact, we can talk about this. But at one point in my career, I tried to go back and do a thing that I had done similarly, which was to go to Puppet Labs.
Yeah.
And they've been successfully just been acquired by Perforce, but I figured out within weeks that I was there that was not a good decision to go back to something that I was more familiar with. I wasn't happy there at all, and I sort of found the nearest escape hatch.
That's interesting. It's a bit different because like when I was younger, I believed the same thing. I always wanted to do a different. My dad was an entrepreneur, and I always wanted to do a different industry. So sure. I think I started in recruitment, and then I went into events, which is where I met my lovely wife, and then went to this random American company called the Corporate Executive Board that had like the three most kind of corporate sounding names that they tried to cram into one company name, which my friends always found rather amusing, which was like subscription research services. And then got into software, literally knowing absolutely nothing about software. So I totally buy into that. Like you want to go forward, and then when you go back to something, you're like, nah, I've kind of seen this. That's really.
I need to get out of here. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I think then over that time, then you would have seen. Because I've witnessed it really even over the last kind of 6 years that I've been involved in Precursive, like. Even the evolution of like our services delivery and the expectations from customers on like what that feels like. I think it gives me some reassurance that you were saying that you were at 35 people and you were still kind of figuring it out, right? Which makes me feel better. But I think one of the things that we see is like, so also within the technical environment in particular, when you're dealing with developers or technical buyers, is like there is this kind of like expectations from customers that they're gonna get their hands on the product or service very quickly. I mean, how have you seen this world of software and SaaS evolve? And how has that, in your view, shaped the world of professional services?
Yeah. So you mentioned Bizarre Voice. That was my first SaaS business. I had come from BMC Software, which was very much an old perpetual software, brick and mortar, stodgy company that was not good at innovation. And I left there to go to Bizarre Voice, where I met Pat Phelan, who you mentioned, and worked with him. And I had no idea, what I understood SaaS, but I didn't really understand anything yet. And one of the things that I saw very quickly was that, at least at Bizarre Voice, their approach when I first got there was, let's just sell some things to our customers. And ultimately, Bizarre Voice, as I'm sure Pat would have mentioned, offered a ratings and reviews widget and capability for manufacturers and retailers to put on their website, and then a network of ratings and reviews in the back end that they could share across, et cetera. And so we were not doing implementation consulting per se. This was a product that the customer, and generally their agency, their design agency or artistic agency, would have to implement in their website. And we would be there just to provide very advisory technical consulting to that. And I recognized a few things fairly quickly. One, without a really strong business case for a given website or for a given web property, neither the retailer nor manufacturer really cared to go quickly. So we had to work with them from customer success, from sales, from PS to help make that case and to continue to define and redefine that value add. On the services side, I had come from this very classically P&L driven professional services business, and I joined Bizarre Voice, where they had no such thing as statements of work. They had no such thing as scope. They didn't really think about PS, only to say that sometimes they could sell PS, and usually the sales rep would have sold. If they had sold PS, it would be $1,000, and if they had not, it would have been zero. But we'd still have to do all the things that we had to do, and those things were undefined because it was just either a $0 or $1,000, and maybe it's 800 days worth of work, right? And so,
Wow.
Meanwhile, Bizarre Voice was going through this transition themselves of going from a very bespokely designed product that was more of a platform that they would build for their customer to then implement, to a much more of a SaaS, not hosted, but a SaaS application that they called Conversations. And Conversations had plenty of problems. It was very new, teething issues, but it meant that the customer had to go, we had to do a lot less effort. The customer had to go from doing a lot of work to doing very little work. But there was still some non-zero effort, and there was still a process to be followed. And there was still, if you do this, you get this benefit. And if you do that, you get that benefit. So the first thing that we did was work with the sales team to define how are we actually going to sell PS. This is specifically for EMEA. We did this in spite of some objections from our US counterparts. But how would we sell PS? How would we define that? We would work with the customer, manage expectations, design the scope of work, and a statement of work format. And we began to sell a lot more than $1,000 worth of PS in general, but also we gave our customers the option of saying, you know what, I don't want any help, or you know what, I only want this small little package, or I want this project where you're going to really help shepherd me through. And obviously, having been in that classical brick and mortar company, I was able to understand, like, how do we shepherd customers through and set expectations, rather than how do we just do open bar or whatever. And then once we had that, it was actually a lot easier for us to have this sort of meaningful engagement and joint accountability between our customers and ourselves. The workload for my team was far more rationalized, which did a lot to inspire morale. And also customers felt like, oh, hey, I've paid for this. Maybe I do actually want to pay attention to it rather than not. And we felt that we were actually helping customers to get live in their web properties a lot faster, frankly, by charging them for it and by setting expectations and by driving them through that, which is not necessarily how everyone thinks about services. And some people say, well, let's just give it away because it adds value. But sometimes it's you value more what you pay for. And that was certainly the case at Bizarre Voice. So we saw that. And when I was at Fuse, similarly, there was a lot of challenge between do we charge our customers for this thing that we really want, which is to get them live, or do we not? And so we spent a lot of energy defining, well, what are the basic things that we have to do that our customers can't? And what's the value added stuff on top of that the customer could do? And we have to go and expose that to them and just set expectations. And then frankly, similar thing here. It's always about what can you do versus what can't you do? Where do you need help? And where is that value add? And then exposing that to the customer and having those business conversations, it adds so much value and momentum to the process. Yep.
There's a lot in that that I'm going to also try and summarize as we go through, because I think you really, there's a couple of very interesting insights in there, which is if the strength of the business case impacts the deployment velocity and urgency is so bang on, because it's really interesting how much time and effort goes into companies developing sales processes and methodologies. And you've got, for example, Medic, which I think probably you guys use, or value selling or solution selling, right?
Yeah.
And so you're teaching these actually very sophisticated business acumen, business case structuring teams. Salesforce, for example, they have a business case value team that does that. And it comes together and it's like, we're going to deliver this amount of revenue, this amount of change, this amount of automation, and it's justifying this X million spend and this ROI. And, realistically, that's slide one in your kickoff, right? It's like, this is why we're all here, ladies and gentlemen. Now, if that is the holy shit moment of, wow, if we can deploy this thing in, X amount of time, we're all going to save, 20 hours a week, right?
Yeah.
And 2,000 hours in total. I'm kind of all in. I think that is underappreciated, I think, in terms of that. How do you build that connection between the two teams, right? Between sales and delivery. Agreed. It's like they're these two tribes, and they actually don't understand that that's the central sort of nodal point between the two, which I think is really interesting. And I love your phrase of open bar. I'm 100% stealing that because we are in that situation as well, because we have a solution that's on Salesforce, so it's very flexible, and we believe that that's one of our differentiators. But it's also something that hampers you, because then you start, well, yeah, you can do that, and yeah, you can do that, and yeah, you can do that, and then suddenly you've got your configuration has just spread and all
Absolutely.
of these types of things. So I love that. Now, you know, customer success has also, particularly since the pandemic, right? It's really the world has shone a light on customer success and SaaS, because, you know, for many organizations, they would have been impacted by the pandemic, perhaps on the new business front. So CS has risen and perhaps accelerated over the last few years. But, you know, you can be the best CSM in the world, and if the implementation has failed, you're not going to be able to do your job. So how do you think, though, that rise in importance of CS has shifted how services teams operate? Because it's getting a lot of press, but kind of I feel like services is the unsung hero in a way.
No, I think they're both the unsung hero, if I'm honest.
Yeah, right.
I firmly believe that the customer success team, you know, in many cases are doing the yeoman's work, and yes, they get some praise for it, but there's a lot of work there. So I think what's the way that I see it, you know, I mentioned I was a BMC software. There was no such thing as customer success. They weren't SaaS. I think they've since rebranded services to customer success, but from my understanding, it's basically the same thing. Which may be an exaggeration. So Bizarre Voice was the first place that I really experienced customer success, and I think they had a very strong customer success program. And my understanding is that in the CS industry, they're at least well known to have had a very strong CS program. I think they had, you know, some very good practices and some good thought leaders there. And I learned a lot just from, you know, watching them and working closely with them, with Pat and his team, et cetera. The way that I've come to think of it over time, though, is that there's a strong intersection between what professional services need to do and what customer success need to do. But especially as we all focus more on greater customer adoption and consumption and this sort of pay per use model, it's a tighter choreography between the two organizations. And I think that, you know, anyone would be remiss to treat them wholly independently. And it's not just about collaborating, it's about collaborating toward very joint goals and having shared goals between them for in a given company, but also even within a given account, and making sure that there's a well understood sort of roles and responsibilities for a given account of who's going to talk to this person, how did you talk to that person, can you introduce me to this person, what did that person say, right? And the challenge that we're finding, and I think we're going to continue to come up against until we can really correct this, is how do we manage that choreography without stepping on one another's toes, such that we're not just sharing goals and going off and working, but like sharing a lot of information over time, and making sure that that everyone involved has, like, maybe not perfect, but very nearly perfect information. Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of blurred lines, right? Particularly in with existing customers, where, you know, I've seen it literally helping the guys with a situation today where we've got a large enterprise customer. They sold one of their product lines, so which meant that, you know, the team that was using our product in that delivery time no longer existed, right? So then you have you know, a bunch of licenses that are not being used, not that they're not valuable, but it's then, okay, we want to rehouse that, and then there's another organization, and then you're talking, well, we want to basically get them onboarded, and it's kind of like a POC, but do we charge for it? Do we not charge for it? Right. So when you were talking there about, you know, people, do they take consideration of something that they're paying for more seriously? I 100% agree with. But then you get into this situation with an existing client of saying, well, actually, in this instance, we don't want to do that because that might then be a barrier and that slows us down. So there's always that nuance. And I think that education piece, I would imagine, have you, you know, when you talk about that education and communications, Do you guys do anything there that you think, like, is it just really working at it and making sure that everyone's aware of it, or have you created some structures where management or teams come together in specific cadences and things like that?
At the moment, it's the former. We're working on the latter. So
Right.
it's a little bit more brute force, and
Yep.
I'd like us to get to a point, fairly soon, like within the next few quarters, where at least for 70 to 80% of those interactions, that it becomes a lot more elegant and well choreographed. Today, we are stepping on one of those toes, and and it's not causing huge problems, but it's inefficient.
Right. Well, there's a good episode that I recorded recently with David Sakamoto, who's the VP of CS at GitLab, who talked about this topic, and what they've done is they focus very, very heavily on like documenting things, like having those scenarios documented and who owns what. I think it's a lot of work. There's a lot of work to get it to the point, right, where it's understood. Yeah. Okay, cool. So if we kind of turn to you guys for a moment then. So you've mentioned you started 35 people in PS. You're now at about 200, and I understand that you're going to be growing to, is it 300 this year?
We will have at least 300 people in PS by the end of the year, and we're likely, given what's happening this year at the moment, we're likely to be over that.
Wow. Okay. And so are you guys looking at kind of how you need to sharpen or transform, your services delivery? Can you tell us a little bit about anything that's happening there?
Absolutely. So there are a number of aspects to this. One is that we are, I'm strengthening the leadership infrastructure at the top and bringing in some extra leadership, bringing in more operational control, making sure that we have just stronger controls over the business. And we're looking at building a roadmap of how we manage our data and telemetry, et cetera, for the business. And that's an active initiative. We're also, though, thinking about how do we scale. And, one of the problems of scale in any case, but at that height, is enablement of the team and making sure that you maintain quality. So we're investing fairly heavily in delivery enablement, sales enablement, and that enablement is at the technical level for new hires, for partners. That enablement is for our service to sales team, but also for our project managers and delivery leaders, et cetera. So there's a lot of work happening there. And then at the same time, as I mentioned, this interaction with customer success, we're also evolving the professional services business to be more customer success oriented. And that isn't to say that we're trying to take over customer success, but really see more of that intersection and operate in a way that's much more deliberate about adoption of our product within a given customer. So to make that more tangible, we've always had this objective of helping our customers to adopt more and therefore to grow our footprint within our customers. But I think the way that that's been interpreted and metabolized by many in the delivery team has been, well, I just go in, I solve problems for my customer. I'm smart. They like the product, and Bob's your uncle. Like they'll grow and everything's fine. But the reality is that what we want is for the team to be much more deliberate about discovery and influence and putting more playbooks in place for how do we gain influence. Because frankly, service is not sales, and it's not sales. And I think I want my team to fully metabolize that over the coming quarters, that we are all in sales. And that's not to say that anyone who feels conflicted about that from a consulting perspective, because sometimes those conflicts exist within an individual or a team, that they also understand that our job working with the customers is to make our customers successful, but to do so in a way that ultimately makes our sales team far more efficient and effective. And therefore helps our customers to grow. And as we as a company focus more on allowing our customers, lowering friction for our customers to adopt more of the product and reducing the number of transactions that they need to do that, it democratizes the ability for us to help our customers grow and help our customers adopt. And it means that while most of the new workloads and new applications that are going to be put onto MongoDB Atlas for the foreseeable future are going to come from the sales team, it does not preclude services from having a direct impact. And I find that really enticing.
Yeah, it's always this. Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Like sales is always a bit of a dirty word in services and success, but it's actually it's like, someone said to me a long time ago. It's like I was in a meeting and someone said to them, "Oh, nice pitch," and the person I was with said it wasn't a pitch. It's kind of this. There was this kind of like moment. It's not a pitch if I know what I'm talking about, right? It's
Yeah,
just business.
confidence.
So yeah,
and credibility. Yeah,
exactly.
And the point that I
customer
make,
acumen as well, right?
yes, exactly. And the point that I make to my team is that consultative selling is heralded because it's consultative, right? So we're the consultants.
Yeah.
Let's figure out how to learn the other side of that phrase as well, and be consultative to our customers in a way that if we believe, to your point, if we're credible and we believe in the value add, then let's help our customers get more value from it.
Yeah, great people in PS. I think the feedback that you'll always see from if you've got a great process, whether it's pre-sales or in a services environment, is the client will be saying, I would pay for this interaction, right? I would pay for this process that you're taking me through because I'm learning so much more about my problems and the nature of the problems, and they're multifaceted. And actually, we see that all the time when we do certain things, process walkthroughs, reverse demos with clients, and you see the senior person doesn't know actually that all of this shit's happening at this level, and they're seeing it for the first time, and they're like, "Wow, we're working what way?" Like, So I think that's very illuminating. I think the enablement side of things, like we're working in this remote environment now. So how has the remote environment, do you think, changed the way that you work with your team and or with your clients? What kind of benefits have you seen from that, and maybe perhaps what are some of the challenges that you've also encountered? I know that's quite open. You can start with internal and client based or whatever you want, but
sure. I think everyone has a degree of fatigue about the current situation.
Yep.
Enough said, right? Zoom can be exhausting, and
yep.
I think that what that does is it offers this sort of always on opportunity to connect with people, and it's easy and obviously efficient in that people don't have to travel to get everyone together in a meeting, especially across time zones and geographies, etc. And I have found that at least effective and useful, but I've also found it really inefficient because being based in London, I have good time zone good time zone access to APAC, good time zone access to US West Coast, but they still don't have good time zone access to one another. So if I want to have an all hands meeting for my global team, that's painful. And even for my global leadership team, if we actually want to workshop, it's still so much better, at least from memory, to get in front of a whiteboard and get everyone in a room together. And so I found that is difficult. The other thing that I find internally, and I suppose that all of these things apply to externally as well, is that when everyone's on a Zoom, the only way to have any sort of side conversation ever is via Slack or something like that, or some chat app, because there's only a single conversation that's allowed on Zoom at any given time. Whereas if you're in a workshop all day, there are coffee breaks, there are lunch breaks. You get to pull someone aside and say, "Hey, let's have a quick conversation," and that there's some fidelity lost in that. And when we think about working with our customers, it's a lot more efficient. We are available when they're available, and vice versa. We can get on a Zoom with them for half a day without travel. We could, we even have a line of business, our Flex Consulting, that is half day units of consulting for customers, which can be very effective for our smaller customers who need just transactional help. But from a field perspective, those people who once traveled to our customers, while that might become harder even in the future, because on-site means a little bit less when the customers have had some sort of diaspora of like working locations. It also means that there aren't these water cooler conversations. There aren't these conversations at lunch where you get to meet other people that you're not working with. It's difficult to have those side conversations. It becomes much more perfunctory and superficial. And so there's no rush for the team to get back into traveling into the field. And, I and the team, I think for the most part, are fairly safety conscious, and, we're not trying to do anything that that might cause any super spreader events or anything like that. But there is a recognition that we will have more influence and more impact on our customers when we're face to face, when we're able to have side conversations where, you know, you run that process and wait 5 minutes isn't, okay, let me go check my email for 5 minutes. It's, hey, so how was your weekend? And what are you doing? And have you heard of this? And, oh, Bob over there on that cubicle, he's here, or, you know, or Sally over there, she's also using MongoDB or thinking about it. You know, let's go talk to them and show them what we're doing. That's the sort of thing that as a consultant, I used to do once upon a time. But it's, I can absolutely imagine that it's far more difficult to have any of that sort of tangential impact when you're on.
Yeah. It's also, do you find that it's from a capacity planning perspective, it's interesting, right? Because in a way you can have more capacity, right? Because like you mentioned, you don't have the travel element. I mean, I was chatting to a friend of mine who runs a consulting business. He's like, you know, we'd have to fly in day one, and then, you know, then you do your workshop day 2 and day 3, and then fly, and like the whole week's done, right?
Yeah.
And that was like, you know, arguably inefficient or certainly costly. But and then you've now moved to a world where you can have, well, you wouldn't want it, but 8 hours of Zoom calls a day. But that, from a capacity planning perspective, is much more fluid and almost like lumpy, right? It's much more agile and iterative. Have you found that like it becomes a lot more, dare I say it, it's like this, we call it this high velocity services delivery. It's kind of all over the shop, right? Do you find that much more difficult to manage for people and individuals, do you think, or what are your thoughts there?
I think that that's almost been net zero for us. And the reason is because everything that you've said is true, but it also means that from a customer perspective, it's a lot harder when someone's knocking on your door saying, hey, I've just flown in from wherever, to say, I'm sorry, we're canceling for the day. It's a lot harder to do that when you're knocking on the door than when you're like supposed to be scheduled on Zoom. And what we find is that, you know, certainly our last minute cancellations spiked during COVID, which made sense. But even since then, they've never really come back to pre-COVID levels. And I think that's just because it's very easy to get distracted. It also means that it's harder to your point about 8 hours of Zoom a day, it's harder for one person to, whether it's from our side, which we'll do if we need to, but from the customer side, just dedicate 8 hours in a given day to Zoom, or even 7 hours in a day to Zoom, when you know, Slack going off and texts going off and emails coming in, and it's very easy to get distracted. So there are certainly efficiencies in terms of travel and timing and capacity, but there become all these inefficiencies in execution that are the norm now. But it would be nice to, you know, be back to some degree of normal at some point.
Cool. Well, last couple of things, super interesting. I mean, loads of good stuff in here, I think, for people to take away, and I steal loads of these ideas as well, Brad. So that's great. I love people's language. I'm always like, workload rationalization. I love that one. That's very good. So you moving to this more modern SaaS economy type of services delivery motion, focus much more on, let's outside in, right? Customer first, value drives ARR, retention and growth, and that type of mindset. Talk to me a little bit, like in this new world, about what are some of the metrics that matter to you, be that, I don't know, things like time to value or whatever it might be that, but what are some of the kind of like the key metrics that you're more focused on now, and less so kind of the traditional services revenue and margin?
So we still look at, because we have people to pay and the business to, effectively run, we care about how much services are we selling. We care about, therefore, how much revenue are we delivering, and what does that do to margin, et cetera. But we very much as a company think of that revenue as reinvestment opportunity, and that margin is reinvestment opportunity. And I spoke with someone yesterday who is running, working for a competitor and running a services business there, where they have a very high margin target. And that is not how we've designed things. We've designed things here to, at best, break even, so that we are reinvesting as much as we can in the business. Nonetheless, these classical metrics, while we still look at them, we're moving toward looking at our impact on ARR. And we've been doing that increasingly over the past few years. So, one of the first things that we began to do was look at, for customers who bought services, how have they grown relative to customers who did not buy services? And we've been looking at that for years, and we run that report every year or two. And it's always customers who don't buy services over 8 quarters, they grow like 12%. And customers who do buy services over 8 quarters, they grow 112%. And that's pretty consistent. And frankly, not that surprising, but at the same time, not strongly
in a way
defining whether it's correlative or causation or causative, right? We don't know, are services actually doing that, or is there like, are customers already essentially telegraphing their commitment to be successful by buying services? So it's kind of hard to say. We did, however, look at customers who did not consume versus customers who did consume, and that felt like a bit more strongly correlated and causative, because customers who, I don't remember the exact numbers, customers who did consume versus not grew faster. At the same time, we also started looking at, not just over an 8-quarter period, but over a running 3-quarter period. How have customers spend? How has their spend grown in terms of ARR over a 3-quarter period versus a baseline of customers where we did not interact with them at all? So we looked at all the customers where PS did interact in a given quarter based on timesheets, et cetera, and then all the other customers, how they did not interact. And customers who worked with PS were consistently growing, considerably faster. And so that we felt was good. But actually, all of these are sort of post hoc, and it's difficult to understand what you can learn from that. So if I'm a consultant, or if I'm running North America, for example, okay, so my customers grew 20% faster than the baseline over the past 3 quarters. What did we do 3 quarters ago that actually caused that? And how do I even know what that was? Or my customers didn't grow. What do we learn from that? And so that we're not, I grew disenchanted with that model of really looking at that. And so what we're doing at the moment, and we haven't completed this yet, but we're looking at defining what we believe to be hypothetical leading indicators for all roles and services. So if you do A, B, and C, very much like a sales model, if you do A, B, and C, then this suggests a high probability that you will have a positive impact on your customers' adoption and growth. And so what are those A, B, and C for a consultant or a project manager or an engagement manager or whatever, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we haven't defined those yet fully, but like we have a pretty good idea of where we want to go with that. And I think that's going to be a lot better for us to understand, okay, for all the people that did these things, did they actually see growth for their accounts? And therefore, can we bless that as a formal leading indicator over time? And how can we track that? Or do we have to tweak this? That for me is the holy grail of where we need to get to next.
Wow, I love it. I really like the, it's like a services attach, isn't it? Services attach rate to ARR growth ratio.
Sure.
That's super interesting. It's always funny, like I was again talking about as we're growing and evolving, and we're not your size yet, we're only 50 people right now, right? But our legacy from customers 4 years ago, where we were like, let's have a product that you can just buy off the shelf, right? You just buy it and install it. We're as you may know, but the listeners know, we're like a Salesforce app, right? So we're built on force.com. You can install it in Salesforce, and it's pretty straightforward. Great. We were like, let's have off the page and off you go. Now, in theory, that's great to scale, but then customers get to a certain size, and then their business model changes, and then they haven't set it up necessarily the optimized way versus what it is now 3 years later. So there's all those dynamics that you're trying to navigate through over a multiple year periods. And I was talking to one of the CS leads in America, and I said, like, we've just got to accept that there'll be a certain portion of our customer base that you almost evolve away from. It's not like that they're churning. It's just that you're evolving away from them into a new world where your average ACV is a lot higher, the sophistication of what people are doing, and your platform is a lot bigger, and you've kind of got to be comfortable that that's happening.
Yes.
So I think it's interesting that, like, when you talk about, because I think also within this ARR growth, there's also like a cyclical thing, right, with customers, where it's like you might just have at a certain point in time a group of customers that are going to move on or aren't going to grow just because of the nature of their business model and how their business has evolved versus other ones, right?
Sure. Yeah, and certainly customers tend to buy databases workload by workload by workload. And so long as there are more workloads, there remains more opportunity. And for very small customers, for customers that are maybe have a single application that is the heart of their business, perhaps, maybe there is really only one opportunity there, and maybe they only grow, or that instance will only grow at the speed that they're essentially growing. But the larger customers, and we're not even talking the Goldman Sachs of the world, right? They're also large, et cetera. But just the medium-sized, larger customers are, they will have many different workloads. And frankly, I don't think there's a single customer where MongoDB has 100% penetration. We're still scratching the surface, and you would normally have a lot of legacy applications. And so we look at replacing, displacing, winning new workloads essentially rather than others. But you will have customers who are not necessarily stalled. We would see that as bad, but who would grow and add some workloads, and then maybe they don't have anything pressing, or maybe they're working on technical debt and backlog, and then they grow, and they're sort of in fits and starts, and we see that happening often.
Yeah, it's that segmentation almost by business model as well, isn't it, with your customer base? Absolutely. Well, look, it's been super interesting. I'm massively grateful for the time. We're going to give you some time back, sir, but I'm going to try and summarize a few of the kind of the learnings for me and hopefully everyone. So I think there's number one is that, going back to that, make sure you've got a great business case. A great business case is going to drive, the urgency in deployment and in services delivery. I think also we talk a lot. I've heard a lot about this tighter choreography, as you termed it, between CS and PS. I think what maybe companies need to understand is that needs to translate down, as you said, at an account level. Yes. Right? Because it's all very well and good saying we're both measured on ARR, and then you actually get into the day-to-day hand-to-hand combat, and then it all goes out the window, as it were. So I think that's great. I think I just, I'm a big believer in moving your services delivery from kind of the open bar world to the more productized delivery, at least in phase one, because then you can see faster time to value. And I think what companies don't appreciate, which we certainly see, is this workload rationalization, right? Because you're more efficient with the time of your team. I think anyone listening to this who's moving from the traditional kind of world of services revenue and margin, which, by the way, still matters and your CFO still cares about, and if you are losing loads of money, you might lose you might lose more than your job, in fact. But I think understanding the correlation that you've articulated between PS and ARR at a consumption level of, do people who buy services, I know people look at that, but I don't think they understand the correlation could be, like you talked about, some significant differentiators. And then I love the leading behaviors piece around, if you as an individual are doing A, B, and C, you're going to drive these outcomes for your client, and that's going to improve your work-life efficiency and the success of your customers. So loads of really good stuff in here, sir, and hopefully it was reasonably enjoyable.
Yeah, that was a good time. Thanks, Jonathan.
All right. Awesome, sir. Well, listen, Barry, have a great day. Thank you for joining, and look forward to connecting in the future.
All right. Thanks a lot, Jonathan. Have a great day.